I'm going to be talking about the California cap and trade market, and particularly family forest owners and their priorities and their management priorities, and then opportunities and constraints that they face under the cap and trade market. This is part of a larger project, but for today I'm going to be presenting two small components. So one is just asking who's in the California carbon offset market. And for this, we've maintained a database of registered projects. Most of these are in the cap and trade market. If you have questions about some of the particulars, I can answer those later. And then we did a survey of family forest owners to ask why they own land, what are their concerns about the California carbon market, and why they might actually join the market even though they're concerned about it. And for today, for most of the talk, I pulled out the surveys that were from what we call the Redwood region, so Humboldt and Mendocino counties. I'm going to share some of those results, and then at the end I'll return to some of our broader California results. So one reason to look at the Redwood region is because, especially in the early days of the market, this was the region where a lot of the carbon protocols were tested and implemented. This was kind of the incubator of the California market. So if you look back in 2006, there were only a couple projects, but they were in the Redwood region, so they were in that light blue region. And as the protocols have gone through different iterations, you see a lot of landowners still in the Redwood region. And still today, under the cap and trade protocols, you see a lot of projects in the Redwood region, and you start to see more non-Redwood region California projects and non-California projects, because anyone in the U.S. can join this market. And I'm going to be talking about improved forest management projects. So these projects, the idea is that you're sequestering more carbon than you would without being in the market. So you can manage your forest for carbon. You can also manage your forest for timber production. So if we're looking at who owns the land in the U.S., the non-industrial private forest landowners or family forest owners own a lot of land. They own about 35% of the forested acres compared to corporate, which is industry, or TIMOs and REITs. They own about 18%. Public agencies own about 44%. Now, if you look at who's kind of eligible for the market, which is basically non-public lands, so private lands, 2/3 or 62% of the eligible acres are in family forest ownership. And then you see our other category there, that's mostly conservation lands, and we put tribal. So if you look, though, at the percent of the improved forest management projects that are in the California market, only 15% are coming from family forest owners or non-industrial private forest owners. And almost 60% are coming from some sort of conservation landowner or tribal, and private corporate is actually at about a quarter. This is in terms of number of projects. If you look at this in terms of hectares, you see this is broken down. So you have the family forest landowners, conservation, tribal, and then industrial and TIMO. So this is those corporate landowners. They only have about a quarter of the projects, but in terms of number of acres or hectares, they have a lot of the hectares. They have big projects. And a lot of those are outside the Redwood region. So blue bars here are Redwood region, red bars are non-Redwood region. Miscellaneous includes everything like from sculpture gardens and gated communities to church ownership. So there's a lot of sort of random owners in there. But one thing that you notice is that under the NIPF, or the family forest owners, the Redwood region has a lot. They have proportionately a lot of those projects in terms of acreage. So I'm going to shift towards what we found with our survey. One of the things that I wanted to highlight is just the management objectives. Why family forest owners? So these are people we surveyed who had more than 100 acres of land, and it was forest land. And in Humboldt and Mendocino counties, people have really diverse reasons for owning land, and this is found again and again when you survey family forest owners. They own that land for a lot more than timber production. And some of the highest values are, these are just the top 10 reasons that people said they own land, but beauty, to pass the land on. And in this area, it's really important. There's a high objective for valuing that land as part of a farm or a ranch. Probably higher in this area than other areas. So that's indicated as very important, which is that dark red. Protecting nature is very important. And then you get down to about reason number 9 is production of timber products. So it's not a large incentive for owning land, although about 75% of landowners in our survey had cut or removed trees, and 44% had used an RPF at some point, which suggests that they'd had some sort of commercial forest operation. So they might not be prioritizing the production of timber products, but they're definitely cutting trees. In asking landowners about the market, I mean, one of the things we wanted to get at was whether they were familiar with it. So our survey was both trying to assess their participation in it, but it was also trying to educate them and kind of reach out and say, here's what the market is, and walk them through the obligations of it. And you'll see that about 38% didn't have any prior knowledge of the market prior to receiving our survey in this area. That means that most of the landowners had heard of the carbon market. And that makes sense because the carbon market was from California. Landowners around here know about it. But the information sources were really diverse. So a lot of people were getting information from the news or other media. Quite a few had heard about it from their RPF or the Registered Professional Forester. And then landowner organizations were a source, other landowners, and University Extension actually was not a very common source of information. So landowners were familiar with the market. So one thing that we did is we asked, are you likely to enroll? And this might be unsurprising. Most small-scale landowners are not likely to enroll, and not even with financial assistance. So the dark red bars say they definitely would enroll. The dark blue bars, they definitely wouldn't, and then the green in between is they don't know, and most landowners don't know. And so this tells us, that most landowners aren't looking to enroll in the market, and probably that's for many good reasons. A lot of them wouldn't have viable projects. So the question might be, why ask them about their intentions or their priorities under the market? And I'm going to try and make the case that we can learn from this market even if the landowners are fearful of the constraints. We can learn how to better design markets if we want them to join the markets. So if we asked about the constraints, we kind of walked landowners through all these constraints and saying, this is what the market makes you do, this is what the market makes you do, how worried are you about it? Upfront costs and ongoing verification costs were major concerns. And so you see the dark red bar, they said those were huge concerns, and that makes sense. But actually a lot of the concerns had to do with locking up their land. So they wanted their heirs to be able to make decisions. They wanted to be able to change their minds if their management objectives changed. And this makes sense, but I think it's something that the market doesn't deal with very well. We tend to think of it as an expensive market, but for a lot of these landowners, it's always also a very restrictive market in terms of their management decisions. So even though they said they wouldn't join, we did ask why they might join. Why might you join this market? And it makes sense that a lot wanted revenue. They could get revenue without harvesting wood products, so you can get revenue by keeping your timber out on the stump. You could receive revenue in addition to harvesting wood products. And then a lot of landowners said it was very important that forest health could improve under the market. We didn't actually query any deeper than that, but I thought that was interesting. And a number of landowners said it was important to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So they would actually potentially join the market to do something that they saw as the right thing, to reduce greenhouse gases. So in asking about whether they believed in climate change, it was an interesting contrast because the landowners, what you see here is dark red is strongly agree, dark blue is strongly disagree with these statements. So if you ask whether human activity is causing climate change, only about 40% strongly agreed with this statement, and about close to 50% agreed or strongly agreed. And this is actually lower than the national average right now, like in Gallup polls. It's about 57%. So landowners weren't necessarily in agreement with this statement. But the interesting thing was that more landowners thought that it was human responsibility to alleviate climate change, and a lot of landowners, so over 60%, thought that forests could reduce the impact of climate change. So there's a little bit of complexity here. I'm not quite sure what's going on. But most landowners didn't seem to, well, so what I'm going to talk about here for a moment is that is landowners as a whole. So if you consider all these landowners, their motivations for land ownership are diverse, their motivations for potentially entering the carbon market are diverse, but they don't want to enter the market for economic and non-economic reasons. So what we did separately, if you look at all the California landowners, you can run a pretty cool analysis called a factor analysis. And this analysis clustered landowners according to whether they were likely to respond similarly on these questions about landowner motivation. And by clustering landowners, we were actually able to tease out some of this diversity and look at the landowners as types. And so the first type was amenity landowners, and they tend to prioritize enjoying the beauty and the scenery and protecting nature, protecting the land from development. Legacy landowners tended to value their forest as part of their farm or ranch, to pass on their land to their children. And then the income landowners were the third type, and they had production of timber products, but also other forms of income that they tended to prioritize. And if you consider them, as different types, you can start to look at the motivations a little bit differently. So I'm not sharing all these results, but there's a paper in Review at Environmental Management about this. Amenity landowners were more likely to believe in climate change, and they were more likely to be motivated to join the market to curb greenhouse gas emissions. Legacy landowners were less likely to believe in climate change and less likely to be motivated by reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And income landowners, they were way more knowledgeable about the market than others, and this kind of makes sense. They've done timber harvests in the past probably, and they have probably a closer relationship with an RPF, and they were less likely to be wary about a lot of the market constraints, more likely to be willing to have people come onto their land, take measurements, and do repeated measurements over time. And so I think that this has messages about tailoring kind of payment for ecosystem service markets for different landowner types. The carbon market might be too high a bar for a lot of these, the regulatory carbon market is probably too high a bar for a lot of these landowners. But payment for ecosystem service markets, this is a way to incentivize management for all kinds of things, habitat, carbon sequestration. And amenity landowners really can be reached by talking about non-extractive benefits. I think legacy landowners are more receptive to messages about maintaining forests as working forests, continuing land-based livelihoods, and income landowners are probably the most open to these markets and the complementary nature of payment for ecosystem markets and timber production. And the reason that this is somewhat important within the context of California, even though the landowners are not likely to enter the market, I still think that we can learn a lot from asking them about their ownership priorities and their constraints. The items in yellow are things that I highlighted in my talk, but the first thing is that family forest owners are underrepresented in the market. So if the purpose of California's improved forest management market is to sequester more carbon, you have all these landowners out there who are unable to enter the market. There's a huge land base that's just not included right off the top. The second is that family forest owners could disproportionately actually benefit from joining the market. They're less likely, others have found, than other landowners to have long-term management plans, and at least from a land ownership perspective, they can be economically marginal. They're making less money off their land often than larger industrial or corporate landowners. So the benefits of joining a payment for ecosystem service market can be even greater for these landowners. The third point is that market objectives are actually pretty well suited for some family forest owners. So family forest owners have diverse land ownership objectives, and this fits really well with the carbon market. The carbon market kind of fits with their multiple objectives quite well. And then the last point is that within the carbon market, you have to practice something called natural forest management, and this means managing for native species and managing at multiple age classes and a couple other things. But most landowners in our survey indicated that they already practice this, so they're already kind of partway conforming to some of the requirements of the market. And with that, I'll take questions. Yeah, Jared.
Give us some idea. You mentioned amenity, legacy, income landowners. What the relative ownerships are of those different classes? I mean, if you get the acres, how many acres of amenity people versus legacy percent? Do you have any idea? Is there a way to get that?
So I don't have that for the Redwood region. Sorry, I don't have it off the top of my head. Most people, their amenity was more, but legacy has larger, and income has larger. So amenity is more landowners, smaller acreages. Kind of makes sense. Yeah.
I missed where the mark is. How do you define the family forest from the non-industrial industrial? What's your?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So
one other part of my question is, how large was your study group? What percent of the family landowners responded to your question?
Great. Two really good questions. So in tracking the market as a whole, the non-industrial private forest landowners were anybody who was not industry, who was a private landowner that we could identify as not one of those other categories. So they still tended to be fairly large acreages because large acreages are in the market, whereas the family forest owners in the survey where we could actually look at the ownership information and just boot out anybody who is industry. And so we surveyed everybody over 100 acres who is not industry. So the big picture market, the NAPF, those aren't all, that's why I kind of interchangeably used family and NIPF, because some of these are actually probably just, well, they're not exactly family forest owners. They're going to have a lot of acres, several thousand at least. The other question was response rate. The response rate was, okay, so let me see. The response rate was about 21%. Not great. That is for a survey that comes in the mail that's not terrible. What we thought was that one thing is that we were probably actually getting at a lot of absentee landowners, and also probably a lot of landowners who didn't identify necessarily as forest landowners. They might have been growers. Another thing is that the survey was fairly complicated. So we sent out, I think I have a number here, sorry, but it was about 21%, sorry, I can't find it, about 21%, and we had about 150, I think 170 usable surveys. Okay. Great, thank you.